All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Form Check Friday, Post Worlds Edition. I know it's been a while. We're maybe between spaces right now. We're in the process of getting everything set up for the new HQ, so I am recording this video from my humble abode. Hope none of y'all mind too much. The quality might not be what it usually is with Dylan's very fancy setup. But I'm going to do my best to still bring y'all good quality advice and, the usual that we get with our Form Check Friday. So, without any further ado, let's start off where we left off last week. So last week we left off with Lucas here. And Lucas says he's 26. He was inspired by Chris Bumstead to start deadlifting. He just started a few months ago, and this is 100 kilos. He said 5 to 7 reps, so somewhere in that range. But he says he feels like he could use more weight. So we left this one up for y'all to take a look at last week, and let's take a look what I can see here. Unfortunately, we're having to deadlift off of these dampeners or something like that, so we are getting a slight advantage, right? You can tell the bar's not quite on the floor. So my first piece of advice would be try to get somewhere where you can actually deadlift from the floor. That's going to go a long ways, especially if you're looking to potentially compete down the road, or you're looking to see your strength in a sort of, legitimate 1 rep max way. The biggest thing I'm seeing here is we're really stiff legging it, right? So this is probably what a lot of bodybuilders would do. They'd use the deadlift as a kind of accessory movement, as opposed to being sort of a top end strength movement where we're really trying to test or improve our 1 rep max on that exercise. So you'll see here, you can see your back is very, very horizontal, right? We have a very high hip angle, and generally speaking, if we're looking to try to get a little bit more oomph, a little bit more strength, a little bit more consistency, a little bit more, technical prowess, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to sit those hips down a little bit. We're going to allow the knees forward, and we're going to try to get this torso into a bit of a more upright angle. What that's going to do is it's going to allow us to use the quads off the floor. It's going to give us a more advantageous back angle, which is generally going to allow you to maintain a better back position throughout more of the lift. So this is a great sort of accessory movement, but I would actually classify this as a separate movement from the deadlift. This would be the stiff-legged deadlift, right? So this is a great movement to do maybe at the end of the day or as an accessory movement when we want to work to build up all of the muscles involved in the deadlift. But this isn't necessarily the way you're going to shift the most weight. So if you're looking to build your deadlift in a sort of powerlifting context, what we're going to do is, again, bring the hips down a little bit, let the knees forward a little bit, and let's get a little bit more upright with that torso angle. It does look like you're doing a really good job bracing, pulling the slack out of the bar. A lot of the basics are there. I think it's mostly just a positional thing that we can work on there. Our next submission comes from Gideon. So Gideon's squatting here. He's 23. He's been powerlifting or training the power lifts for a year and a half, and this is a low bar double at 8 to 8.5%. So let's see here. It's 260 pounds. He says he's relatively tall / has long legs, trouble with depth and maintaining position over 80%. So he says he feels like a wider stance limits his stability. So to me, I mean, there's no depth problems there, Gideon. That's the top of the knee. That's the crease of the hip. You're at depth on all these reps so far. So I wouldn't worry about necessarily widening your stance or anything like that to try to help you get depth. You just need to be consistent, right? It isn't some sort of, hip structural limitation or some kind of flexibility or, dare I say, mobility restriction. What it is you just need to practice that bottom position. So I don't think you need like hints and tips for getting to depth, because you can get to depth. The big thing that I'm going to get you to work on is when you're getting to depth, try not to fall forward, right? Try not to allow everything to come forward onto your toes. And this might be aided by getting a heeled shoe. That's something to try out. Not necessarily always the solution, but usually a pretty easy one and works pretty well for most people. A heeled shoe is going to allow you to get depth a little easier if you're finding that's something that is inconsistent. A lot of times taking away some of the necessary flexibility in the ankle can allow you to get depth by allowing you to kind of, put your weight a little bit more forward, allowing you to put your ankle in a position where it's already, it's removing some of that flexibility demand from the ankle. So you're able to get depth. It's just a matter of being consistent with your depth. Number one, stop looking in the mirror. I'm guessing there's a mirror here. Don't look at it. This rack is good in that you can take these and put them on the outside, face out. Don't get distracted by watching yourself squat. You want to be able to feel yourself squat. You want it to be a very sort of internalized thing, and visceral even. So you want to be feeling it as opposed to watching it. The other thing that I think the mirror is doing is it's causing you to crane your neck up so you can watch, when in actuality, what I would probably recommend is having your gaze looking down that way, right? So that we're able to keep the neck kind of in line with the rest of the trunk. And lastly, I would just do some paused squats, some tempo squats, where we're keeping that tempo really smooth, nice and even all the way into the bottom position, so that we can work on becoming more comfortable and becoming more consistent with how we're hitting the bottom of the squat. So I don't think you have any wild flexibility issues. And unfortunately, this means there's probably no quick fix, oh, here's a cue, there you go, all done, all better, everything's fixed. No. Try some heeled shoes, might help, might not. The big thing you need to do is practice your squat, practice your depth, become more consistent at depth, become more comfortable at depth. So you'll see that basically the underlying thing here is to simply keep squatting, practice your bottom position by going to depth every time you squat, and some of those accessory movements like tempo squats and pause squats can really help. All right. Up next here is Min. Min's 21 years old, lifting for about a year or so. This is a bench press triple at 8, and he says that the bench is going pretty well, but his 1RM doesn't seem to follow properly from his rep work. And I'm not sure which way he means. It might be that his rep work is really good and his 1RM is really poor, or his 1RM is well ahead of where it should be based on his rep work. So number one, got to tighten either put those wrist wraps on better or get new wrist wraps, because that blowing off is really distracting. The other thing I'm seeing here is a real sort of hesitancy with the bottom position, right? So you really ease into the bottom and it's really quick out of the bottom. We're not getting any kind of pause there. So similar to what I was telling Gideon, one of the things you'll need to do in terms of developing your bench is spend more time in the bottom position, right? Spend more time with that bar on your chest. 2-count pause, 3-count pause bench. Those are all good variations. Even pin presses where you have them set up such that the bar is going to be on your chest when it rests on the pins. But basically hammering that bottom position so that we can be more consistent there. Other than that, technically, I don't think there's a whole lot wrong. You've got a great arch. You've got this good sort of leg drive with the feet out in front here, which I think works super well for some people. The amount of tuck and flare and shoulder position, elbow position, bringing your chest up to the bar, you're doing all that stuff really well. But the big thing is, we need to train that bottom position. Now, it's an interesting question when we start talking about, why the rep work doesn't necessarily give us the same numbers we're getting when we go to test our 1-rep maxes. And that can be for a number of reasons. You could just be really good or really bad at one or the other, either rep work or your top singles. In the case that your top singles are underperforming based on what your rep work would suggest, number one, we need to make sure that we're executing our rep work to a competition standard, right? If we're doing a bunch of touch and go bench and then we go to pause our singles and we're like, whoa, it's so different. Yeah, that's why. The other thing you can do is start practicing singles. Start working singles into your training plan. And the performance of a 1-rep max or an intense, relatively intense even single is a skill. The strength to do that is one thing, but the coordination and the ability to coordinate under load is a skill that is learned and practiced. So if we're not doing any singles throughout our training year and then we just do a single when we test the max, Well, a single execution wise is a bit different than doing a heavy set of 5, right? Sure, there's carryover. You're going to build strength, but you need the skill to perform and to execute in those higher intensities. And if it's the other way around and your reps are, sort of giving you a lesser indication and you're better at singles, like, it's not a bad problem for a powerlifter to have. If you really want to work on that, then again, just train your rep work. Do more rep work. It's crazy how simple a lot of this stuff is when you really break it down, but you just get good at what you do. You get better at the things that you practice. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying, if you want to get better at singles, do them. All right, this is Noah. Noah's doing some deadlifts. This is the end of his first powerlifting block. He says he was using AMRAPs capped at 6 reps, and he got up to 355 for 6. I think this might be this set. He said it looked like an RPE 9 to 10 or 9.5 to 10. He says his deadlift is progressing slower than his other lifts, but he's planning to compete in his first meet in February. So let's see. Unless this gets way harder, I think we might just be... Yeah, that's not anything close to a 10, my man. You are way stronger than you think you are. Deadlift, I think, is one of those lifts that for a lot of people can be really psychological. And we can really start to be like, it's so heavy. Oh man, this is crushingly heavy, because relative to the other weights, maybe it is a lot of weight. If you're anything like me, you deadlift a fair bit more than you squat. You deadlift 4 times as much as you bench. But that means that everything over like 80% just kind of feels heavy. So at some point we got to look at this video and be like, okay, here's our last rep. It doesn't even slow down. It doesn't even slow down. This is a 7 at most, right? You got at least 3 more reps in there. And that's why, so when you said you do AMRAPs, but then you cap them at 6, it's like, okay, so do you adjust the load to try to make it so you're hitting like a 6 RM? Because then you might as well just program like a 6 at 9 or a 6 at 10. And I think that's a little more to the point than saying do an AMRAP but stop at 6. By prescribing reps to an AMRAP, you're kind of removing the, I don't know, the whole function of the AMRAP. But anyways, I digress. So yeah, number 1, I think you're good for way more than you think you are. And number 2, the only, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold here, so if my voice seems a little scratchy and weird, I apologize, y'all. The only thing that I'm really seeing technically, like, you got a pretty damn good setup. You got a good position off the floor. You do tend to like wedge things forward as you start, and we can see your heel kind of lift up a little. So this whole like looking up, trying to get super upright thing, I'd maybe scratch that a little bit and just, again, look down here, keep your neck in line with the rest of your trunk, keep some weight on your heels. But the pull works out pretty well. You can see on this last rep, this is the sort of big sloppy thing that I see technique wise, especially if you're looking to compete. Number 1, you go way through, like, this is way too far locked out. You don't need to lock out that far. What's going to happen is you're going to either go way onto your toes or you're going to unlock the knees, which is what happens here, right? So when we lock out the deadlift, I want you to think about just locking out up. Don't worry about trying to lock out back and pull back, because 9 times out of 10, when people lock out back and pull back, these knees come unlocked and we get those stinking gross red lights. We don't want those. We want white lights. So when you lock out, let's see if I can get a good frame here. Like, that's okay. That is way too much. Not necessary. That is okay. Even maybe a little bit too much there. But yeah, those are my big tips for you. So with your setup, don't allow yourself to list onto your toes here. Look at your feet, right? You can see some space under your heel, and you've got a lot more weight on the sort of forward and midfoot. I think you could leave a lot more weight on the heels, and with your lockout, no need to lock out quite so far. Just think straight up, keep your knees locked. All right. Next, we have Garrett doing some squats. Garrett is 19 years old, says he weighs about 185, and he's been lifting around 10 months. So this video is 340 for a triple at 8. I think he said his squat is progressing maybe slower than his other lifts, and he's not sure. He just wants some eyes on it. He figures maybe his hips shoot back a little bit. Now, yeah, they do. I think the big thing here, again, is that you're kind of sliding forward in the bottom. And then in order to get out of that position and find tightness, everything kind of shifts back. So if we could see your feet, we'd probably see that you're rocking onto your toes quite a bit in the bottom. So again, pause squats, pin squats, tempo squats. We need to practice the bottom end. People out there, everyone listening, chances are if something's going wrong in your squat, you can probably just focus in and practice the bottom position of your squat, and it will help. Even if it's just mentally, if we're psychologically a little bit more tuned in, a little bit more focused on how we're positioned into the bottom of the squat, and you can just do this in your warm-ups, right? It doesn't need to be a separate exercise. You can play around with tempos and pauses in your warm-ups to try to get more of a feel for where your weight is distributed in the bottom of your squat and how your feet feel into the ground in the bottom of your squat. But yeah, this is a lot of the same kind of thing that I was talking to Gideon about, right? So right here, pretty decent squat, but as we hit the bottom, the knees pop forward a little bit, weight pops out onto the toes, the bar comes like well past midfoot, right? And then in order to get back up, the hips shoot back because that bar is out in front of us. So, I think sliding forward less in the bottom. Also, when you come up out of the bottom, keep those knees forward, right? The age-old cue of just like keeping your knees forward, keeping some pressure on your toes. Now, I know I just told you to put less pressure on your toes, but here's the thing. Here's the thing with this sort of fault in the squat. We want you to be more on your heels on the way down and more on your toes on the way up. Because what's happening right now is you're coming down on your toes and you're coming up on your heels. Right? So we need to essentially kind of cue you the opposite direction to try to get you basically just nice and flat-footed and set throughout, right? We don't want that weight rocking around on the feet. We want to be popped in, set, and settled, and we want that nice even pressure through the foot so we're not bouncing back and forth through space and that weight of that bar is kind of tossing you around a little bit, right? Upper back position looks good. Depth looks pretty good. Yeah, it's just a little bit of patience and a little bit of practice in that bottom position. And I think that'll go a long ways for you. You got a nice squat, man. You got a nice squat. Keep it up. All right, and our last video here is from Shawn. Shawn's doing some bench. He says triple at 80 kilos. He says supposedly an 8 RP. Definitely could slow the bar speed down on my negative, but wanted your opinion on bar paths and leg drive. Currently on the road to a 2-plate max right now. Max right now is probably 92.5, so still a little ways to go. So what I'm going to get everyone who's watching to do is head on down to the comments section below and let us know what you think of Shawn's bench. What do you think he can do to help tighten things up, to help accelerate his progress, or just to work on his consistency as he works towards his goals? I also want to mention really quick, for anybody still watching, make sure you head down into the description box below. Check out the Calgary Barbell Training app. We have a wonderful database of programs, a very interactive training log that helps you get the right weight on the bar for each and every set. And we also have a private Discord for users of that app where I do things like this in the community twice a week or so, as well as answer any programming questions, help people work through any hiccups or injuries they might have in the programming. It's kind of like coaching light. So if you're interested in that and you want another way to support the channel, that is a great way to do it, and we really appreciate it. Hope we can see some of y'all over in the CBB app Discord. Again, that's link is in the description box below, and we'll see y'all in the next Form Check Friday. Take it easy.